Well, hello everybody. So it's the 1st of May, which is quite significant because we've now been in this lockdown in the UK for a whole calendar month and more. And many other countries in the world have been in a similar situation. Now, there's no secret, if you've seen some of the last couple of videos I've done on this, that I'm opposed to there being a lockdown. Well, I understand that why initially politicians, MPs and peers voted for it, because they were working on the advice of this Professor Ferguson of Imperial College, who predicted through mathematical modelling that 510,000 people would die if we didn't have a lockdown, and if we did, there would be 250,000 people dying from it. So with that advice, many politicians, to give them the benefit of the doubt, were probably acting because they thought they were saving lives. But the day after, actually the same day as the Coronavirus Act was passed in the UK, Professor Ferguson issued new predictions based on modelling, which said, well, actually, it's not going to be 250,000. I'm now only predicting 20,000 people will die from this particular version of the coronavirus, which is no more than in a severe or moderately severe flu season. And what we've seen over the last month is that actually there's been more than 20,000 people have died with the coronavirus, which is different to dying of the coronavirus, because many of the people who have died, and of course it's very sad, every death is sadness for the friends and families of people who pass away, but for the vast majority of people who have had COVID-19 written on their death certificates, there were comorbidities and underlying health conditions. And if there were a severe flu bug going around, that would probably have had the same effect as this particular coronavirus that originated in Wuhan in China, which is why I and many other people call it the Wuhan coronavirus. So what's going on now is that we're clearly past the peak of infections and cases and people who are sadly dying from this coronavirus. That happened in mid-April. But now there are new narratives being spun. I spoke about the narrative of a second wave, which sort of appeared a couple of weeks ago. Now there's a couple more narratives which are appearing in the mainstream media, which appear to be being perpetrated and propagandized by the government as well. And some of the advisors around the government is that this RO value, which no one's really talked about much before because it's a scientific term, which just basically means about how many people someone with the virus who is infectious passes it on to. And again, this is being done by modelling. So they're suggesting that we mustn't let the RO value go above 1. So if you get this coronavirus, you mustn't be allowed to pass it on to more than one person. How they're actually going to do this or know this is beyond understanding, really. But they're using this to justify keeping people in a lockdown, shutdown situation, to keep it going for as long as possible, it seems. And you've got this language which is being used. How do we get out of lockdown? Well, it's very easy. The government, or Boris Johnson, who's the Prime Minister, could just say, today, we're leaving lockdown. That's it. That's all they need to do. Or we're easing it, at least. And some countries have started to eased the lockdown. Germany has. And interestingly, now in the mainstream media, they're having a go at Germany and saying, well, Germany's eased lockdown. Now there's more cases. So in the UK, we mustn't ease the lockdown prematurely, however long that might be. So all these narratives are being spun and created to keep the country in a lockdown, to keep us in a state where our civil liberties are gone and where businesses are forced to stay closed. And that will then mean that tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of small businesses in particular will go bankrupt. There's 5.7 million registered businesses in the UK last time I looked, and 10-20% of those, maybe more, will go out of business, which is going to cause untold suffering in the long term to hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people who will get this coronavirus but not suffer unduly from it, will have mild or symptoms or symptoms which are not very severe. And that seems to have gone from the discourse which we were told at the very beginning, back in January and March, when the government and the mainstream media and the World Health Organization were downplaying the seriousness of this new virus. So they were all saying that most people are not going to get this severely. The vast majority of people who get this virus will not be in any danger of losing their lives or even going to hospital. It's not going to hurt many people at all. It's only going to be like the flu. Now we're in the situation of a lockdown. They've gone to the other extreme and are spinning all these narratives to keep us in this state for as long as possible, it seems. And this is really not what the country needs. It's not what the world needs. And there seems to be people who want to implement these contact tracing apps. And what I think is coming down the line in the UK, because it's already been mooted in Australia and other places, is that you won't be allowed to go to the pub or you won't be allowed to go to certain places unless you download a particular contact tracing and surveillance app onto your mobile phone, so that the NHS or the government or some agency will know where you are all the time and who you're in contact with, who you're talking to, how much time you spend with them, for your safety and security. And you'll be restricted unless you get this downloaded and you give permission for someone to trace where you are and all your movements all the time for your health and safety. Now that hasn't been said in the UK yet, that if you don't get this app, which is coming in 2 or 3 weeks' time, that you won't be allowed to go to certain places. But because this has already happened in other countries, I'm expecting that very soon someone's going to make some announcement here that says if you want to be able to go to a cafe or a pub or travel on the tube or something, you'll have to get this app and you'll have to be traced and surveilled all of the time. Which I think is another outrageous affront to civil liberties. And this seems to be what's coming in. There's the whole narrative about vaccinations, which is still going on. But I think there seems to be less of that because people seem to have realized, well, there isn't going to be a vaccination available for 2 years at the very most, because it will have to go through all kinds of safety testing. You really can't do that in the space of a few months. So That's sometime way out into the future. I certainly hope so anyway, because I am completely opposed to mandatory vaccinations. Now that hasn't been expressly said in the UK, but it has been in Denmark. So their version of the Coronavirus Act gives the government power to forcibly vaccinate their citizens in Denmark. So something that's happening in one country, which is part of the agenda of the certain people who are connected with these organizations that seem to want to bring in these control measures. If it's happening in one country, then it's will inevitably be spread to other countries as well. So these are things that we have to look out for, and we have to resist and say no if we care about our civil liberties. Now look, if this were really a serious, very, very serious pandemic, which was killing people left, right, and centre, 5%, 10%, 20% of the population, or people who got it, if it was something like Ebola or the Black Death, then yes, I do think we would need to put in place some serious measures to control movement for our own health and safety. But this Wuhan virus is not in that category. It is like a serious flu season. It's like a very, very bad flu season, but it is not worse than a very, very severe flu season. It's not Ebola. It's not the Black Death. It's not the Spanish flu, which killed something between 20 and 60 million people when there were only a quarter of the number of people living on the planet than there are today, which is a quite interesting thought, that 100 years ago there were only 1.8 billion people living on the planet. Today there's 7.6, 7.7 billion people, which is really quite a thought, really, that in 100 years the human population has more than quadrupled in size. So if there was something like the Spanish flu today, it would be expected to kill 100 to 300 million people. So this Wuhan virus is clearly not in that category at all. So it's not something that we should continue to take away civil liberties for, or to have these measures in place which are going to cause hundreds of thousands and millions of businesses to go bankrupt. And politicians need to unwind, have a bit of courage, look at the observed data rather than the modelling which has come from Ferguson, Fauci and others, and unwind these lockdowns and get us back to normality